What's up, YouTube? This is 2 Raw 4 TV. So, at number 2, I wrestled with this one, man, and I have to admit, when it comes to a playoff career and accomplishments, man, you got to put Bill Russell up there. Now, I know that some people will say this, well, if you don't have Wilt, because you probably can tell who's going to be number 1. If you don't have Wilt in your top 10, how is he better than Bill Russell? Well, like I said before, I got Wilt sort of like number 12, number 11 playoff career. Circumstances helped Bill Russell because the team that he had, or the team that he had, versus the team that Wilt was relegated to for much of his prime until he was 29, 30 years old. You know what I'm saying? So there's certain circumstances that were beyond Wilt Chamberlain's control. But when I look at his dominance, when I look at what he was able to accomplish throughout his career, both regular season and playoffs, I just feel like Wilt Chamberlain was the greatest player ever. But like I said, it's just an opinion, and I also don't think it's like Wilt is way ahead of everybody else. He's right there, like the top 3 or 4 guys. You can make an argument that they are the GOAT overall, in my opinion. But that's just me, all right. But number 2, I got to give it to Bill Russell, man. Ultimate winner, 11 championship rings in a 13-season career, went to the NBA Finals 12 times. The only year that Bill Russell's Boston Celtics did not advance to the NBA Finals was in 1967 when they faced an all-time great team in the 67 Philadelphia 76ers who went 68 and 13 on the year. In 1958, the only year that they lost the finals, it took a great final series from Cliff Hagan and a 50-point closeout game by Bob Pettit to seal the deal for the St. Louis Hawks, the then St. Louis Hawks against the Boston Celtics. When we look at Bill Russell, man, like I said, 11 championships in 13 seasons. Now, they did not have a finals MVP when Bill Russell played until his last year. And of course, in 1969, despite the fact that the Boston Celtics won their 11th and final championship in the Bill Russell era, they chose to give it to Jerry West. And when you look at Bill Russell's career, you can make an argument that he should have won finals MVP at least 5 times, possibly 6. 5 to 6 times he should have won finals MVP. Now, this is one to knock against Bill Russell. You say, well, why not all 11 times? Well, earlier on in his career, he had a hell of a fucking teammate in Bob Cousy, who was some years the best player in basketball. 57, I believe he was league MVP. A couple of those earlier years, if there was a such thing as a Finals MVP, it could have went to Bob Cousy. Then there's some years you could argue it should have went to Sam Jones. Some years it should have went to John Havlicek. He had a loaded fucking team. Obviously, a loaded team. And in many of those series, the difference was not Bill Russell, but oftentimes the backcourt of Bob Cousy, Sam Jones, or Bob Cousy, Bill Sharman earlier on, or later on, Casey Jones, Sam Jones. It was often those 2 or 3 that made the difference. Then you had one of the greatest all-around small forwards, one of the greatest defensive small forwards, swingman of all time, John Havlicek, very underrated. To me, overall, he's a better player than Scottie Pippen. Right, I believe he's number 2 to Scottie as far as small forwards defensively. And you can make an argument that when it came to clutch performances, he was more clutched in Scotty in certain instances as far as defense is concerned. But Bill Russell was the anchor of that team. Bill Russell did elevate that team from being a really, really good team in 1956 to being a championship level team. But no, make no mistake about it, man, he got a lot of help. And that's what kind of brings him down a little bit to me. When you look at the accomplishments, though, Bill Russell played in 165 playoff games. He won 64.8% of the playoff games that he participated in. When you look at his regular season numbers, they went up considerably in the playoffs. In the regular season, Bill Russell averaged 15.1 points, 22.5 rebounds per game, second only to Wilt Chamberlain's 22.9. And he averaged 4.3 assists per game. Now, we don't know how many blocks per game Bill Russell averaged, but I would guess if they had the numbers, it would have been somewhere between, I would say, 5.5 to 6.5 blocks for his career, or maybe even higher than that. I know that for most people's observations, his blocks per game went down the last couple of years because people just stopped challenging him as much because of reputation. Um, Maybe even higher than that, man. It might be more like 6 to 7 blocks per game for his career. I think I might go with 6 to 7 blocks. But in the playoffs, his scoring average went up to 16.2, and his rebounds per game went up to a playoff record 24.9 rebounds per game, even greater than Chamberlain, and 4.7 assists per game. And gods know how many blocks, 7, 8 a game. I don't know. With the way that the game was played back then, um, centers were more aggressive. Who knows how many blocks he averaged? A ridiculous amount. He led the playoffs in rebounding 7 different times, including in 1961 when he averaged an absurd 29.9 rebounds per game during that title run, meaning he almost averaged 30 rebounds a game in 1961. Just phenomenal dominance on the boards. During his career in the playoffs, he averaged 45.4 minutes per game. He was an absolute workhorse. 3 times he led the playoffs in minutes per game. 1959, he averaged 45.1 minutes per game. 1961, he averaged 46.2 minutes per game. And 1962, the year of the absurd numbers, he averaged, and this was the MVP year for him as well, he averaged 48 minutes per game in the playoffs. So while a lot of people rant, ooh and ah over Chamberlain averaging 48 and a half minutes per game somehow during the regular season that year, Bill Russell averaged 48 minutes per game in the playoffs that year. Um, Bill Russell, throughout his playoffs career, accumulated a record total of 4,104 rebounds per game. Unbelievable numbers. He led the playoffs in win shares per 48 minutes once. He led the playoffs in win shares, total win shares, 5 times, and led the playoffs in defensive win shares 10 times. 10 times. And he anchored the greatest dynasty in the history of the NBA. Now, what other knock could you put on this team? Well, they weren't as many rounds, so the playoffs weren't quite as challenging. It wasn't an opening round, semis, conference, finals. Oftentimes, there were just, in some years, 2 rounds. Some of the years, the way the playoffs were constructed, the Celtics got a bye. So it wasn't the most challenging playoff runs at times. But you do got to credit Boston with those last 2 titles they won in 68 and 69, because by that time the Boston Celtics were looked upon as dead, and they had to overcome a lot of obstacles to win those last 2, especially in 69 when they were the second lowest seed ever to win a championship as the 4th seed out of the Eastern Conference. And at that time you were starting to see the rise of certain teams that would dominate in the 1970s, such as the New York Knicks and the then Baltimore Bullets, soon to be known as the Washington Bullets, and the Milwaukee Bucks. But Boston still had one more title run in them. Um, you know, but Bill Russell, man, you got to give it to him, man. Ultimate winner. Yes, there were fewer teams back then, but you could also make the argument that with fewer teams means stiffer competition. Like if you were to get rid of 15 teams right now in the NBA, Ja Morant, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, uh, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Trey Young, those guys don't have to worry about their jobs. It's going to be the lower tier guys that don't have to worry about their jobs. So the level of competition would go up on average in the NBA. So that's one argument to be made. I mean, yeah, they only played 8 to 14 teams during this title run, but at the same time, they played against stiffer competition, you know. And one other argument I'll make against Bill Russell for being like the GOAT is when he had his strongest uh, years. Like, for instance, 1962 when he averaged, I think it was 62, when he averaged 30 rebounds per game. In the finals, they were going up against the Lakers, who did not have a great center. So oftentimes, Bill Russell was dominating against teams that had mediocre centers in the finals or in the playoffs the few times. So anyway, shout out to Bill Russell though. All in all though, one of the greatest playoff performers of all time.